Well, my name is F. Murray Abraham, and I have been invited by my good friend Julian Schlossberg to interview him. And I got a whole bunch of questions. I would like to ask Julian how he feels about the radio.
Murray, I love the radio. It was the greatest way to fuel your imagination. There you are, you're on the prairie with the Lone Ranger. You're in Jack Benny's vault. You're with Phil Harris, the Shadow Knows. I mean, there was so many things. And I think the advantage that we had, you and both of us, was the fact that we grew up with radio, that was the beginning, because it was an exciting way to visualize and imagine. It was great, as I say, for the imagination. What was so exciting for me was years later to be able to meet Jack Benny and to meet Phil Harris and to spend time with them, because in a kind of a way it was a full cycle.
I think that's really good fortune. That's a part of our business that's so lucky that we do get to meet these people who are our idols. But in some respects, it's best if we don't meet them, because sometimes it can be pretty disappointing.
Well, that is true.
You must have some stories.
I do, but I don't want to get into the disappointments ones, because we'd be here all day. I would say this, and I think this is interesting about radio, was the fact that it was very, very kind of disciplined. You were disciplined to know what time they were going to be on, to make sure you were around for it. It really fueled a lot that you didn't realize at the time that would help you in later life. I went to radio shows. I went to live radio shows. Arthur Godfrey, his sister, Kathy Godfrey, a guy named Robert Q. Lewis, all these people had radio shows, and you could be an audience member. And I was a kid, maybe 9, 10, but you could go downtown. You weren't afraid of being alone. Your parents let you go. Yeah. And I went to watch live radio shows.
Well, do you remember, have a vivid memory of when television happened?
Vivid. I do, because my God, as I'm sure you felt it, how could this be? How could you turn on this box and people would talk and move and entertain you? It was so incredible. And I was so happy to have, again, go to the early TV shows. But living in New York City, I could go and see, for example, I would see the Perry Como dress rehearsal. I would run to see it. And then I'd get the subway, go home, and then watch it live later to see what did they change from the dress rehearsal to the actual show. You could see why my mother did not want me to go into show business.
It's hard to describe to someone who wasn't there when television first happened, that people would turn it on and watch just a picture, a still picture of an Indian head for hours.
That's right. Well, that was exciting, because that was you were bringing a movie into your home, or at least a picture into your home. But what kids don't believe, when I lecture at UCLA or NYU or wherever I've lectured over these years, they don't believe that you had to get up to change the channel. There was no such thing as a remote, no such thing. And you could never be a couch potato unless you watched only one channel.
One of the things I remember precisely about the transfer from the radio to television, the shows that I used to listen to religiously, The Lone Ranger, Superman, among many others, was that in my memory, I couldn't separate the pictures in my mind from the radio to what I saw on television. It was that clear. The radio was that clear in my mind. I think that's what you were talking about.
It is, and I think that's why, in a peculiar way, television took away imagination in many ways that the radio gave us.
Yeah. You represented for years Kazan, and you were for a long time his closest friend. I would like you to talk about him and your first meeting, for example.
Well, Elia Kazan was a director who won two Academy Awards. One of the most important things about Kazan as a director was he was the first director who directed a new play called Death of a Salesman, the first director who directed a new play called Streetcar Named Desire. All My Sons. sweet bird of youth. This was a giant in the theater and then went to film and was responsible at the of putting the actors studio together. Most people think it was Lee Strasberg. Kazan hired Lee Strasberg to run the actors studio. It was Kazan's idea, along with Cheryl Crawford and Bobby Lewis, Robert Lewis. How I met Kazan was I looked in the telephone book. I wanted to meet him. And I just looked in the phone book and I couldn't believe it, but there he was. With a business address. In those days, they gave you a phone number and a business address, and how you knew it said B next to it. It said 1545 Broadway B. So I went to 1545, couldn't find the building. Realized finally that it was behind the cashier's booth at the Victoria Theater. Looked on the directory, no Kazan listed. So I wait outside. He comes out, 5 o'clock. I'm too afraid to talk. I follow him all the way up to West 68th Street, goes into his brownstone, and I'm back the next day at the Victoria Theater. Second day, I follow him again, too afraid to speak. The third day, we get to 49th and Broadway. He whirls around, and because he's a smaller man than I, he goes, "Who are you? What do you want? And why are you following me?" Oh my golly. All I could do was like Jackie Gleason. He says, "Come with me. I want to talk to you." And we started walking back to his office. And as we walked back to his office, he would describe a person that passed us, or a car, or a sign. But I couldn't think of anything except in my head, I was going to go talk to Kazan. He was going to take me to his office. We went up to his office. It was a small office with a room for a secretary and himself. He stretched out on a couch like a cat. And he said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want to work for you. I don't want any money. I just want to be with you. I want to be around you." He said, "Well, there are plenty of actors who are willing to do that." I said, "But I'm not an actor." He said, "Well, who the hell are you?" And I went into who I was and what I had done. I had worked at the ABC network. Was working at a theater company. And he said, "Oh, do you ever hear of the movie Face in the Crowd?" I said, "Sure. Face in the Crowd was Andy Griffith, Patricia Neal." He said, "I know who's in it. I made the movie." He said, "How about Baby Doll?" I started to say Carol Baker and Callum Walton. I realized I shut up on that. He said, "Look, I'm getting those 2 movies back from Jack Warner of Warner Brothers. Do you think you could do anything with them?" I said, sure I could. Now, at that time, there were no DVDs, there were no cassettes, there was no cable television. There was theaters, and there was free TV. And so I ended up, without a contract, representing Kazan for the rest of his life for 30 some odd years on those movies. And then he got back America, and I had that. And that's how I started in the business, with word of mouth, because when people knew that I was representing Kazan, they thought I must be more than I was. I always often asked him, what was it? And because he said, "Look, I spent my whole life casting. I just felt you would be the man."
What were some of the mistakes you made?
Well, I remember reading The Godfather, the Mario Puzo book, and having a very clear, like we talked about the imagination, and books do that too, of course, like radio. I imagined Vito Corleone 100% different than Marlon Brando. So the concept at that time of casting Marlon Brando seemed very peculiar to me. Now, of course, no one would question the icon status of Brando as an actor, but for Vito Corleone, I didn't see it. Now, fortunately, it didn't become a mistake, because I was running a theater chain at that point, buying the films for the country. We had 80 some odd theaters. I certainly went after The Godfather anyhow because of the title and how well the book had done. Because in those days, if you had a best-selling book, the movie generally at least opened big. But I never saw that. Let's see if we can get a more personal one mistake. Yeah, I did not relate to American Graffiti as a movie. I didn't relate to it because I grew up in New York City. And while I related to a movie called The Lords of Flatbush, which I put in the Baronet Theater in New York, the American Graffiti took place, as you remember, kind of in small towns in the West Coast. And so I just didn't relate to that movie. And that was a mistake. I could have, that one I did not buy for my theaters.
You've worked with some really amazing people, amazing producers, and some really funny, creative people. I'm thinking, of course, I mean, you were a producer's rep for George Scott, Robert Duvall, Shirley MacLaine. What does that mean? What does that entail?
Well, let's start with the comedy first that you asked.
Okay, all right. Woody Allen, Elaine May,
Yes.
Sid Caesar, sure.
Yeah. Well, comedy has always been something that I love, as you do. I mean, one of the things I think our friendship has in common is making each other laugh, or at least attempting to make each other laugh. So comedy always mattered to me. And my very first movie, I was walking on the beach with my then girlfriend, and we started doing some Sid Caesar, Carl Reiner routines back and forth, because we had both grown up with a show called Your Show of Shows, a 90-minute comedy variety special in the early days of television. And I, like I did with Kazan, I looked up Max Liebman, who had produced all these wonderful Show of Shows. And I found his name in the telephone book. And he was in the back of City Center in New York in an office. I knocked on the door. Oh, I called first, called the telephone, made an appointment, knocked on the door. He opened the door. I came in and I said, I'm just wondering, Mr. Liebman, do you have any of those wonderful Show of Shows that you produced 25, 30 years ago at that time? Follow me, young man, said he. I walked down a long corridor. He opened a closet door. He said, there are the 156 90-minute kinescopes, your Show of Shows.
Whoa.
Treasure Island, Burr. Treasure Island.
Oh, God.
And from that, my girlfriend and I, Millie Sherman at the time, we made the movie 10 from Your Show of Shows. And that was the first film I ever produced. And we picked the 10, having lots of fights with Max and Sid, but we all agreed finally on the 10. And the incredible thing about Show of Shows was opening night. Opening night, we did a charity for the Lexington School of the Deaf. And believe it or not, these young men and women came in and could really, even though it was obviously had audio, there was so much physical activity that they could really understand it. At the end, when we were done, Sid was there, and we walked out into the lobby of the Festival Theater, and these children saw Sid, and they couldn't believe it, that man they had seen on there was in person, and they started to sign. And Sid Caesar knew how to sign.
Oh.
And he started signing with them, and I started crying. So taken by it. And the kids were crying. Sid was crying. It was a bath of tears, but it was incredible. It's one of the most indelible memories what's left in my brain. It was an incredible thing. So, okay, that's Sid. Woody was a whole story. Elaine is a whole story. I mean, the fact is I love comedy. I love these people. I worked with Larry Gelbart, Elaine May, Woody Allen, produced for all of them, and would consider that some of the highlights of my life.
I've worked with Woody and with Elaine, and the thing that they share is an extraordinary intellect. That's what people seem to dismiss sometimes. They're really smart people.
It's true. And I'll tell you, when I did Relatively Speaking on Broadway with them, and Ethan Coen was the third, what Elaine and Woody would do right till the end of the run would be to visit, to take notes, and to tell, and to rewrite, because they wanted it to get as best they could get it. Most writers and directors, as you know, are gone. When you the actor are left there to yourself most of the time.
Yes.
not
Yes.
with the two of them.
You know, I've done a lot of plays by Ethan Cohen, and he came to every single rehearsal, everyone, and he would laugh and rewrite. And yeah, rare. It's a rare thing. Some writers you don't want around, actually.
That's right.
You know. Yeah.
Well, we should.
You had the two biggest hits in off-Broadway history. What were they?
Well, Vita and Virginia, which was this kind of a interesting play with Vanessa Redgrave and Eileen Atkins. And it was a story of Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville West, who supposedly, even though being married and heterosexual, may have had a love affair, which of course in those days was taboo. But these are their letters written back and forth to them. And to have two of the greatest actresses in the world was fantastic. But to add to it, I was trying to get a director. Who could I get to direct it? The man who had directed in England directed it like a radio play. So I didn't want that. I wanted it to be as best we could, even though it was two letters, much more interplay and not just two people on radio. And what happened was we got Zoe Caldwell. So to have Zoe Caldwell, this incredible actress, who of course starred in Masterclass and won Tonys, etc., as the third was great. At the same time, on first day of rehearsal, when they all were together, I walked in and said, "Oh my God, I have my three tall women." Because at that time, Albie's play was playing off Broadway, and I got a good laugh. The second was Death Defying Acts, and that was an interesting evening. That was David Mamet, Elaine May, and Woody Allen. It was the first time I worked with Woody, and the first time well, it wasn't the first time with David and Elaine, but it was with Woody. And everyone said to me about Woody, "Oh, well, you can't talk to him, and he just won't talk to the actors, and he doesn't give direction, and this and that." And we were casting, and we cast, and we were all together. And a woman came in that I wanted to play one of the roles in Woody's play. And it was only Woody's play. I tried to get the actors to be in all three plays, but when you have 6 in one and 2 in another, obviously you're not going to get them in all the plays. This was only in Woody's play, and Woody turned her down, and she left. And I didn't know Woody well, but I went to him at the end of the day, and I said, "We've turned down so-and-so, and I would really appreciate it if you would see her again. She's a wonderful actress." And he looked up, he said, "Listen, I will see anybody that you want as many times until one of us say yes or no." I couldn't believe it. This is Woody Allen. This is the man that supposedly you can't even talk to. And it was great. And we brought her back, and she was hired. So I was very happy. I did it a second time, and a second time, another lady was hired. I did it a third time. That was it for me. That's it. So I figured, I think I better cool it now. Enough is enough. I got two out of 3.
The thing about Woody Allen, when we were making the film we made here in town, is that he is absolutely in charge, but in an extremely quiet way. It's extraordinary to see that kind of stillness, because people would stand around him in like 3 or 4 deep, these great big tough guys from the Crews, the IATSE guys, and they would just simply stand there waiting for him to say what was going to happen, because you knew who the boss was and you knew where the buck stopped. And it was a terrific show of the power of the thing that you expect from a director. You look to that person for direction,
and you often don't get it.
Well, let's not go there. Yeah.
But I would like to ask you a question, because I'm still an interviewer, It's
All
not
right.
like I only. And tell me, did he give you any direction? Did he work with you at all on your role?
It was terrific that he would say anything you want. You got that. Try something else. Do something else. Do whatever you want to do. Go ahead. I was delighted. I was If you call that direction, yeah, then that was direction. But it was not shaping it. The fact is, of course, that he's got some terrific performances from certain actors, Academy Award performances.
Yes.
There have been complaints about him not directing people to their satisfaction, but in fact, he has his own methods.
I've been on the set with him too when he was doing his television series with Elaine May, the two of them. And what I noticed that he did often with an actor, he said, "I don't care what you say, as long as you get the joke." The joke. That was the only criteria. Just get that good joke in that I wrote. You know?
That's great. Cut to the chase. You worked at Paramount, and are there any films that can be credited to you?
Absolutely none. There's not one film, despite being vice president of production, that I can take credit for. I was ostensibly in charge of the shooting of Saturday Night Fever in New York.
Ah.
And my entire contribution was to go to the director, John Badham, and say, "Listen, you can't keep cursing in every scene with Travolta. You have to clean it up for television." So they would do, that was my entire contribution to Saturday Night Fever. But I will say this, it was the most interesting experience at the very first day. I knew that we were going to be shooting in Brooklyn. I took my little car and went to Brooklyn, and we did not have any concern about crowds or anything. We were shooting a kid from Welcome Home Kotter, you know, who was one of 4 people.
Yeah.
Well, it was a riot. John Travolta had a fan base in Brooklyn that was as big as Ebbets Field. I mean, we had to get police, we had to get crowd control, we had to stop shooting as he came walking down with his paint can to do the.
Yeah. Wow.
It was, so I guess that's my other contribution. I got on the phone and said, "Help, help."
I was in China in 1982. I was there for almost 6 months.
Wow.
And there was no satellite communication. We were talking with the States via radio, like in the World War II movies, you know, make appointments. And then it was anyhow, the point is, the astounding thing changed between 82, when there was very little electricity, and what they've accomplished now as a world power is astonishing. But you were there later than 1982.
I was a little later. It was around 84, 85. I was invited. Sorry.
Did you see the same thing I did? That, like, there was a lack of many, many amenities?
Oh my God, yeah, it was very primitive. In fact, few things that you were taken aback at. Number one was the enormous amount of bicycles. There were very few cars. When I was there were almost no cars, unless it was a limousine of a Chinese executive of some sort.
Right.
But bicycles, I mean, I'd never seen so many people with so many bicycles. Number two, I was shocked that even the finest restaurants, we're not used to dirty tablecloths, but the tablecloths had all the last meals on it. They didn't change the tablecloths. These were, you know, the little pure guy from America. It was shocking, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I was invited by the People's Republic of China to talk about the pre-production, production, and post-production of motion pictures. And so I went over as their guest to go to Beijing and Shanghai and Beijing and Shanghai and other cities to talk to the people in film about how we did film over here. I was shocked at their enormous sound stages, especially in Shanghai. They had sound stages as big as anything MGM ever had. I was shocked at their outside studios, which were terrific. I mean, really, really something. Mostly, again, in Shanghai, because Shanghai was really the city that Britain conquered and then France conquered, everybody was taking over China over the last few centuries. The architecture on the main street in Shanghai is one half British, the other side, one half French. So these are the kind of wild things that I remember in China. I went 2 years in a row. The second year was because my mother loved Pearl Buck and her books, and she wanted to see China. She was going with her close friend who passed away, and she was going to cancel the trip. And I said, I'll go with you, which I'm glad I did. So I went with her a second time. But the first time was the most exciting for me because I was going in many, many different places. The second time was really kind of more for my mom, you know.
Sweet. All right, we're going to jump ahead to Orson Welles.
Oh, yeah.
You brought back Othello. That's an astonishing thing that there are so many terrific films that are buried somewhere, but you have this extraordinary capacity. It's like a computer mind, and you can call up all these films, and you knew that was a treasure, and you went out and you got it.
It was interesting. In a peculiar way, they got me. In many cases, you were right. I would come up and I would remember, like the show of shows, just remember that they were these wonderful things that could possibly be a movie, or as you say, lying somewhere and just discovered. But I was visited by two men at what was called the LA Film Market in Los Angeles. And they said, we have an Orson Welles film that no one has ever seen. And I said, well, I don't think so. I know all of Orson Welles' films. They said, well, we have it. And are you interested in distributing it? And I said, well, of course I would be. But they wouldn't tell me the name of it. Okay, so I go back to New York and I totally don't hear from them. And I figure, well, okay, these guys were on a fishing expedition. They may have heard about Orson Welles. Who knows what they were doing? Because as you know, Murray, we have more stories in our business of phonies and liars and cheats, and some of those are the better ones. So anyhow, I get a call, maybe a month later. My secretary says there's a Beatrice Wells on the phone. I knew there was an actress with Robert Altman named Wells. I think her name was Gwen Wells. But I had no idea who Beatrice Wells was, and I clearly didn't connect it to Orson Welles. I said hello, and she explained who she was. She was coming to New York, and could she see me? And I said, of course. And she came and told me about her father's movie, and that she would like me to consider distributing it. And I said, well, of course I would. I would love to, but I'd like to see it to see if I think I can do anything for you. I don't want to take the movie and not be able to do anything with it. Well, yeah, I saw the movie, Murray. It was staggering. It was so brilliant.
That opening sequence is astonishing.
It is the most incredible opening sequence of any movie that I can remember ever. And so I did take the film. I kind of worked on it because his sound was terrible. He shot it for 4 years. 4 years. Can you imagine? He'd run out of money. He'd make The Third Man, take the money, go back and shoot. He'd run out of money. He did Prince of Foxes. He would do movies, take the money, and go back and shoot. And it was incredible. It took him 4 years to make, but the sound was abysmal. It wasn't his fault. He started shooting in 1948 in Italy after World War II. Can you imagine what that was like? I mean, the sound in Italy today is no bargain. Yeah. But as you know, better than anyone. Anyhow, we fixed it up. We really made it, I worked on it for a long time, 8-9 months of fixing, mixing, etc. I wanted the best mixer in New York City, who I thought was the best, named Lee Dichter. Lee had mixed all of Woody's movies, all of Mike Nichols' movies, all of Bob Benton's movies, all of the great New York directors who worked with Lee Dichter. So I called Lee, I knew him. He says, Julian, I have no time. I can't do it. I said, no, Lee, I'm not calling you to mix it. I'm calling you just to look at it, to give me some advice. Okay, he said, come on over at 6 o'clock after I'm done here. So I brought the first reel. Now, you know Lee Dichter. Lee Dichter is an artist. Yeah. Lee Dichter looks at that first reel
Yeah.
and turns to me and says to me, "You son of a bitch."
Gotcha.
I knew I'd get him, and I got him. Okay, he says, "This is what I'll do. I can work weekends. I'll work at 7 o'clock at night, but it won't be fast." I said, "No, I'm with you. I'm with you." And I got the best mixer. And that was how I got the best mixer. So again, thanks to Orson Welles, not thanks to me. Thanks to Orson Welles, I got that best mixer.
What was your first job? What was the first thing you did to make some money?
Well, I don't consider $90 a week making much money, but the first job.
Let me stop. Tell us about your newspaper adventure as a young man.
Oh my God!
Do you mind?
You know, this is frightening that you remember these things.
Oh, it's a great story. You up to it?
I'm 10 years old. I'm 10 years old, and I'm walking past the newspaper stand under the IRT train station at Kingsbridge Road in the Bronx. And there's an empty newspaper stand. It's been deserted. And next to it, I see giant piles of paper. And I look, and it's the Daily Mirror, the Daily News. And I think to myself, wait a second. Let's see if I'm with a friend. Let's see if we can open this stand. I said, "Go get a lock." I said to Walter, my friend. He said, "I better get a wire cutter too, because we'll never open these papers." Because it was like bales of hay, Murray. It was huge, huge things. He gets the wire cutter. We cut it open. We have the Daily News, the Daily Mirror. We sell out. And we can't believe it. The afternoon, they drop off the New York Post. The New York Post, cut it open. We're selling like crazy. Sell everything out. Next day, get back there. We have our lock. No one can get in. We have our bales of hay, of newspapers. We do it again the second day. Unbelievable. Third day we get back, it's over. That's it. They figured it out. These guys can't, they're not paying us anything. We're not giving them any more papers. And that was that. That was my newspaper.
Great story. I can't believe you did that at 10 years old. I mean, you're a hustler, you're a handler.
Well, I think it again, it's the radio imagination. I don't think I would have thought of that if I started with television.
Listen, you had a very, very important job at 27 in a major studio. What in the world could that have been like for a 27-year-old man?
Well, I will set the scene again, if I may. It was called the Walter Reed Organization, as opposed to the Walter Reed Hospital, even though a lot of times we felt we were in some sort of clinic. But the Walter Reed Organization had 80 theaters, but in those days, as you remember, Murr, you didn't go out with 500 or 1,000 prints. You opened one theater or two in New York City that set not just New York, not just the United States, set the world. That opening in New York dictated invariably what the world would do on a movie. That's how important it was. And I was fortunate enough to work at a company that had in New York City the Baronet, the Coronet, the Fine Arts, the Festival, the Little Carnegie, on Broadway, the Astor, the Victoria, the DeMille, built the Ziegfeld, had the Waverly in the Village, the 34th Street East. This was, we were in many ways the most important theater chain in New York because we could play day and date, which meant we could open a movie on Broadway and the East Side. Our biggest competitor was Cinema 5, Rugoff, but he had no West Side theater. He only had great East Side theaters like the Cinema 1, Cinema 2, Plaza, Paris. Yeah. But we had the ability, for example, to take a beautiful movie like The Great White Hope, play it at the Astor on Broadway for a rougher crowd, and the Baronet on the East Side for a more sophisticated crowd. Yeah. So it was an exciting time to be 27 and be in charge of this. Plus, we had theaters in Boston, Washington, Atlanta, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, Dayton, Ohio. So in many, many ways, it was not only exciting time, but a very a job that really had a lot of power. I was fortunate enough not to let that power go to my head. I knew damn well that the second I left Walter Reed, I was another schlepper on the street. But while I was at Walter Reed, I was able to do a lot of exciting things. I started midnight shows, for example, at the Waverly Theater with Night of the Living Dead.
Wow.
Yeah, I brought in Truffaut, Fellini, Bergman movies, many of them, and played them. So that was exciting for me. And years later, Marty Scorsese called and said, have you seen the last two Fellini movies? Nobody wants to distribute them in America. I said, how can that be? No, I haven't seen them. Can you arrange for me to see them? I asked Scorsese if he could show me the two movies. One was called Intervista, and the other was La Luna. Intervista meaning interview, La Luna, the moon. I screened both of them. I loved Intervista. It starred Marcello Mastroianni, Anita Ekberg, and Fellini himself. And so I was able to present, it was Martin Scorsese and Julian Schlossberg present Fellini's Intervista. Now, the exciting thing for me was to be with those two guys. But remember in school, we used to have a test, which one doesn't belong? It was Schlossberg. Scorsese, Fellini, and Schlossberg.
Well, the thing that you mentioned in an offhand way about having that kind of power at 27, but not allowing it to corrupt you, is, I think, something that I wish you would examine. Where did that wisdom come from? I knew what I was like at 27, and it sure wasn't that.
Well, I think the reason that I think I was painfully aware of the fact that they wanted the theater, not me. You see, in your case, they wanted you, or at least you felt they did. I wasn't the coronet. I was Julian. And so I never in any way kidded myself. I always was aware of it. It was very horrible at the beginning, Mark, because the heads of the studios in sales were men in their 60s and 70s, and they didn't like a kid coming in. And they would say things like, "Where's your father?"
Yeah, yeah.
"Oh, is Walter Reed your uncle?" You know, whatever. They were very hostile at the beginning to a young whippersnapper, and I had to find a way around it. I found an interesting way around it, and it was sincere, but it was also a technique. And that was, I would call each of them at different times and say, "Could I just speak to you for 15 minutes? "Oh yeah, sure, kid, come on over." And I would go over and I would interview them. I would ask how they got where they got. I was indeed interested, but I also wanted to ingratiate myself. And I was able to do both. I was interested to hear their stories, and I was pleased to find out, Murr, and you'll be interested in this. I was pleased to find out that none of them grew up in New York City, not one of them. And I had the advantage of some street smarts of the city of New York. So that was the only way I think I could try to hold my own with guys who had much more experience.
Well, that's generous of you, actually, because in fact, if you ask anyone, whether they're from New York or not, about themselves, they'll instantly love you.
Well, that's why I'm doing this interview with you. Sure.
You have 25 years of experience at the Cannes Film Festival. What has changed in 25 years?
But first, I have to establish that the last time I went was 1994. So it was 25 years before that. So what's happened now, I don't know. What happened was I took my then new wife and the crowds and the pushing and all the tumult was not for her. That's why you can see trees behind me. We live in the country in a very quiet way. She's a person who would never like the Cannes Film Festival, and that was the end of it for me. I could have gone without her, but I didn't want to. Cannes was exciting for me, but believe it or not, almost every person in the business side, not the talent side, couldn't stand it. They just didn't like it. I loved it. I didn't like it. I loved it. Why did I love it? First of all, you could see movies 24/7. Movies played. If you love movies, I could watch it as many movies as I want, as many times as I want. They were just playing everywhere. So you have that. Number two, you're on the Mediterranean in the south of France, having the best food you'll ever eat in your life.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, come on. But oh no, there's too much activity. There's too many people pushing, and all of that was true. There was a lot of pushing and there was a lot of activity. When I Mur, the highlight for me was the taking Othello to the Palais and showing Orson Welles Othello, the entire Palais. And as you know, because you've been there, you've never seen so many people flashing flashbulb. You've never seen the paparazzi like that. It's like you're on a New York City train. I've never seen so many cameras and flashbulbs. And it's very interesting. There's crowds all around, and they half the time have no idea who you are, but they're screaming and
That's
yelling.
Right. That's right.
I mean, in our case, in our Othello case, we didn't have Orson Welles. We had me and Beatrice and a couple of the people involved in the film. They didn't know who we were, screaming, yelling. You would have thought, so it was nice. The best part of that was to show it in the Palais. Interestingly enough, 40 years after it won the Grand Prix at the festival. We did it in 1992, had a wonderful party afterwards. And my highlight of that party was Emma Thompson coming up to me and saying, you can be proud the rest of your life that you brought back an Orson Welles film.
Oh my.
So
one of my favorites. Yeah.
What a wonderful gal who I did know a little, but not to expect that but she didn't want to come to the party. She came to just tell me that. Well, like a dog on his back, just rub my belly. I was the happiest guy in town.
She's a big fave of mine. The thing that no one ever mentions about Cannes is that the highest priced hookers in the world focus there at that time of year. Anyway, it's a little...
Yes, it's something that I observed.
Astonishing, isn't it?
It is. And
a high-class hooker. Gee whiz.
Even though there was a time on 6th Avenue near the hotels, you could see some real beauties. But we can't get into that.
No.
So to speak. No pun intended.
Thank you. When you look at a script, what are you looking for?
I'm looking for some terrific roles for actors. I'm looking for something that really motivates me in the story, but I need people I can relate to. I would love to find something universal in the theme of the film or the play. But the most important thing to me is I want to keep turning the page. I want to hear what's going to happen next. On what you and I are working on, where you'll be incredibly playing Norman Mailer, you and I have worked as best we could on the script too, because we want to make it as best we can. I look, Murray, to find something that I would want to see. And what makes theater to me so much better than film as a producer, for me, is the fact that in film, for years, I would have, and even today, even more so, I'd have to be looking for what works for the country, a la what I didn't know on American Graffiti, for example. What works for the country? In theater, up until about 10 years ago, it was what works for the New York area. Now, sadly, theater is 70% tourist. 70% of Broadway is motivated by tourists. Now, what will happen when the pandemic is over will be very interesting to see. But yes, I would say, you've worked in all three. So there's a real difference between movies, television, and theater. In movies, for example, as a producer, that train takes off. And if you think that you're going to control that train, you're kidding yourself. You can keep it on track. You can make sure it does, but you're not going to control the twists and turns on a movie. It has a life of its own. Television, you have to move. You got to move. You can't do, in movies, we do what, a page a day? We're happy, page and a half, right?
Yeah.
Is that fair? And in film and TV, what, 5 pages, 6 pages?
7, 10.
There you go, 7, 10. The great thing about theater is not only am I in one location, thank God, you know, in film and television, you're all over the place. Yeah. I'm in one location, and I do feel I have much more control as a producer than in the other two. So it's an interesting phenomenon to produce in all three. Not necessarily well. This may be a function of age, but I'm not happy with most of the movies that are being made. I'm not thrilled with most of the plays that are being produced. And I'm not happy with, actually, of the three, television's doing the most interesting work. Many of the scripts that would be turned down for a movie can be made into a miniseries. And that's exciting work to see. So of the three, if I was a younger man, I would kind of veer now towards television, but I'm not a younger man.
Unfortunately, what television has taught the rest of the industry is that you can make really good quality stuff on a very short schedule, so that bleeds over into movie making. And they are trying to accomplish 5 and 6 and 7 pages a day as well. It doesn't work that way. And you can't. No. You can't. But in fact, as you say, television is more interesting than movies these days. So they say, well, maybe we can learn from them. And it becomes a schedule rather than an artistic endeavor.
Yes.
And it's frustrating. Talking about the percentage of an audience on Broadway that is tourist. There was a time when a Broadway show toured the original cast so that the entire nation saw the original product. And they were able then to parse and decide what was really excellent and what wasn't. Now it's whatever they throw together, a good cast, but it ain't the original anymore. There's no commitment made to the great stars and the great performances. So it's a dumbing down generally across the nation of a product, the theater. How do we combat that here in New York and in the nation generally? How do we start making better theater? I don't think Death of a Salesman would be produced on Broadway today. That's my point.
It would be produced only with Tom Cruise. Or it would be produced.
It's a real Death of a Salesman, that
one. Because any serious play has to have a star now.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely floored at the success of a play that I co-produced. I was not the lead producer. On almost every play I've ever done, I'm the lead producer. But on this was a play with no names that won 4 Tonys called The Beauty Queen of Lanaine. And that was an incredible, a successful play. In fact, so much so that we were able to replace the original cast and keep playing. So to answer your question, though, I don't know, Mar, I don't want to, I'm certainly a man who sees the glass 3/4 filled. I think to be a producer, you better, or you're going to be wildly disappointed often. But I'm afraid that the dumbing of theater is just part and parcel of the dumbing of our country.
Yeah.
And I think that's our problem more than anything.
Yeah.
More than anything, that is our problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I'd like to talk a little bit, if I may, about the play that we worked on in a little theater that we did to show what I consider your incredible commitment to theater and what you do as in your profession. I had a little theater off Broadway, didn't have more than 100 seats. And I wanted to do this play and I felt you'd be wonderful in it. It was a comedy. Again, I love comedy. And I came to you and I almost hat in hand and said, would you consider, and you said, I'll do any play that I care about. I don't care the size of the venue. And I never forgot that. I'm very touched by it, Mark. And I think it's they yell the word artist in our business a lot, but you are an artist.
Oh.
So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, let me see. You formed a new record label. Now, I have some knowledge about the record business because I did some research. I did a part, and I worked with Saul Zaentz. Was a very successful producer, but he made his fortune on the fantasy label. And I was reading about the record business. Probably the biggest cutthroat business, toughest people in show business. That's what their reputation is. Do you have any interesting, amazing stories about the record business?
Well, I don't know how amazing they'll be, but I will say to you, number one, I've tried in my life to do every aspect of show business. I've acted, I've directed, I've written, I've produced. I had a radio show, I had my own television show, and I had the record company. So I pretty much, whatever I could do, I tried to get involved with. I never met people lower than the people in the record business. Cutthroat, as you said, is kind. It's almost a plus. The next worst people would be the movie business, then television, and finally theater. Theater, I met the most sophisticated, basically the most honest, and the most ethical people. Now, sadly, because our society has lost a lot of the ethics that we grew up with, you and I, even it's bled into the theater business. And that's sad too. So right now, I'm concerned for all. And I think what I always say to young people, because I teach a lot all over the country before the pandemic, I enjoy teaching young people. I always say to them, you have to remember in business that there are very few people on your side of the table. They are in front of you, and some of them may even get to the side of the table, but they're not next to you. They're not next to you. So you be careful. You be careful.
Mm.
Yeah.
We met in London because of Mike Nichols. I had done Waiting for Godot, and I was there doing a play and my wife and I went to see Mike in a show. And afterwards, we waited backstage to say hello to him. And after that, we happened to end up at the same restaurant where he was going for dinner. And you happened to be with him. I forget who was the actor, the wonderful actor. He did Do the Right Thing.
I'll tell you. Well, wait. Who wrote it, or who was with us?
Who was the actor and his wife?
Oh, Jeremy Irons and
Jeremy Irons and his wife.
Sinead Cusack, Cyril Cusack's daughter.
That's right. And Mike said, "Why don't you join us?" Anyhow, that's when we met. And you at one point after you had to leave early to catch a plane, and when you left, Mike said, "There goes the nicest producer in show business."
Oh.
And before you left, you said, "I want to do a play with you. I want to do a play for you." And he said, "And when I say something like that, I mean it." And you did.
And not enough. We still have another one to do.
Yes. Oh, yes.
But that was an interesting evening. Mike was acting in The Designated Mourner, was the name of the play.
That's right.
And it was not one of my favorites, to say the least. No, it was a difficult play. But Wally Shawn had written it, and I love Wally Shawn. I don't know him, but I love his work, his acting, Thank you, F. Murray Abraham, for being kind enough to interview me.
What a pleasure. What a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye, gang.
Wait, would you do one thing, please? They can include it if they want to. And They can do
Sure.
whatever they want to, of course. But we talked briefly, speaking of Woody, of Mia Farrow. And I had mentioned in an offhand way, I said, what is it about her that attracts her to some of the most powerful men in the business? She seemed
Uh,
to have been an escort to some extraordinary men. And you said,
I went to an Academy Award dinner in Los Angeles at the Bistro Gardens by a very famous agent named Irving Swifty Lazar.
yeah,
And for a half hour, he was my agent when I was trying to produce Little Me as a movie written by Neil Simon that I owned. I sat at a table of 8, and at the table was Yul Brynner, who kept staring at me with the look like, who the hell are you? And why are you at my table? Norman Panama, remember that name?
yes, yes.
Ginger Rogers to my right, and to my left was Mia Farrow. I did not know Ginger, and I did not know Mia. Mia Farrow made you believe, and I could understand why Andre Previn or Frank Sinatra or Woody, any of them, made you believe that you're the one who could save her. You were the one. Up until now, and I truly believe that the world, Murray, is divided into nurses and patients. We're either a nurse or a patient in our relationships. Now, the best relationship is if you can be part nurse and part patient. But in this case, with Mia, there was no question. I was the nurse. She was the patient. And it was incredible. I mean, she had me wrapped around her finger. Not that she was even particularly interested, but I was gaga. I just thought, oh my God, this woman, I can do this. And at that time, she had a home on the Vineyard, on Martha's Vineyard. And at that time, I had all the theaters on Martha's Vineyard. There were 4, and I had all 4 of them. So I said to her, I'll send you passes. And she said, great. And I figured if I had another dinner with her, I would have given her part interest in the theaters. It was amazing. But I'd love to finish this story because you'll like this. Ginger Rogers was constantly tapping me on the shoulder because I was engaged with Mia. And while Ginger was certainly someone I loved as a performer, her politics were to the right of John Wayne and Attila the Hun. She was really, so I wasn't that interested in getting involved, but I wasn't going to be rude. And about the 3rd time she tapped me, I turned around and she said, I want you to meet. And down, the man was standing, down came the face of Cary Grant. I couldn't believe it. Now, if I had known that Cary Grant was at the party, or if someone told me, look, there's Cary Grant across the way, or he's going to be here, but I wasn't prepared. I was prepared to see Ginger's face. And instead of Ginger's face, there was this gorgeous, tanned, gray-haired man. And I don't think I said too much. I'm generally, as you've noticed, not at a loss for words. But in this case, I was pretty much at a loss for words. Well, I saved that ba-ba for Kazan. By that time, with Cary Grant, I was a little more sophisticated. Ba-ba-ba, maybe. Oh, Murray, thanks again.
What a pleasure.
Okay, we'll talk probably tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.